Okay, the story is called From Zero to Cosmos, and it's a long journey. My name is Cristiano Rastelli, as you heard, and this evening I'm here to tell you this special story. Okay. As you know, almost every story from since the ancient times follow a special path, which is called the arc of the hero, if you want. Essentially, you have this guy or girl, have a call, start to do stuff, find the dragons, finally kill the dragon, and finally we live happily forever. No? This is a classic narrative structure. It happens that my story has exactly the same pattern, essentially. There's a beginning, there's an evolution, a deep crisis, then finally the enlightenment, and we're around here. We're not yet at the nirvana. And this is a long story. If you want to read everything about this story, you can go on Medium. There are a lot of articles there, very long. Like, be prepared. But first of all, let's start from the hero. I'm joking, which is me. Essentially, my name is Cristiano Rastelli. I work in Badoo, as it was mentioned, in the front-end team. More recently, I'm working on the Cosmos team. If you want, Cosmos is the name of our design system. And Badoo is a dating application. We have around 400 million users worldwide, and we have multiple products you will see in a moment. But essentially, on Badoo, people can chat, can date, can meet other people. And we developed an application for multiple platforms, iOS, Android, mobile web, desktop web, but also a few years ago also Windows Phone, for example. And we have to develop for every possible browser, every possible device. And we have multiple applications. Probably you will know some of them. Essentially, there is Badoo, Bumble, and another group of applications, which are, for example, white labels and other products like Chappy, which is for gay dating, Lumen for people over 50, Quack, which is an application for young people. The size of Badoo is not huge. I think some of you can relate with this kind of numbers. How many people of you work with this kind of size of companies, like 500 people all around in the company? Okay, some of you. Essentially, the number looks great, looks huge, but actually when you end up talking about designers, we have like 5, 6 visual designers. Front end, if you see the number is not huge. Larger, the iOS Android team are slightly larger, but you see not huge number of people. By the way, we're hiring, so if you want to join our team in London, we have 4 different open positions. But let's start from the beginning, where this story started. No? Let's go back to the beginning, 3 years ago, as it was mentioned before. I joined Badoo 3 years ago. Okay, when I joined the company, essentially after a few months working on the front-end mobile web, so I was in the mobile web team, I realized that there were no components, no modularization, no one was aware of knowing about the atomic design principle of Brad Frost and so on. And this was what it was happening, the classic architectural error of CSS. I imagine that many of you have seen stuff like this in their life, like global declaration in the global scope, or a lot of copy-paste. If you see here, it's page content, but then it's styled for different pages exactly in the same way, copy and paste. For every new page, it was a copy-paste of the CSS. And the designer's work was good, great, but essentially it was always an end-off, like, okay, this design, reproduce. And the developer never was thinking about, how to say, like starting to look at patterns or start to think how to optimize the design or maybe avoid repetitive work. And so my decision was, okay, we need to have a style guide. A style guide where we start to collect all the components. And I started small and lean, which means for every ticket, essentially, I was starting to add, look at maybe common patterns, start to save maybe a little, let's call it component or partially. It was at the time just a templating language, some partially in some file shared between different section of the website or the application, and collect them in a style guide, which is essentially just a website, if you want, in which I was showing the different style of the same component. And essentially it was like this, nothing special, just a list of items. But the important thing it was for the first time that in Badoo, they were able to see like having an holistic view, if you want, of components. Like, okay, you have a button, but you have the button in different states. Or you have input element, but input level with different state or different data. I don't know, multi-line label. What happens when there is a multi-line? Because essentially we have, I don't know how many languages, how many countries, like. But always the designer were thinking in English, only single line, stuff like this, okay? And it was a living style guide, as I mentioned before. The snippet was used at the same time in the style guide and in the production code. So essentially, whenever there was a change in the component, it was a change that happened at the same time in the style guide and in the code base. And it was covered by visual regression testing, which probably many of you will know. It's a way to detect if there are some changes in the UI, because there is an algorithms piece of software, a piece of JavaScript in Node that compare two images and see if some bits are different, and highlights with this purple area where is the difference. For example, this was one bug that I catched in production. This was really in production, and no one noticed. And imagine that we have a very strong QA in our company. So essentially, we have people, we have automated tests, we have integration tests, we have live shot tests, and so on. No? So essentially, these arrive in production. What's the point of this one for me? Essentially, I was delivering value from day one. Essentially, I was giving value to the company because the thing of organizing the components in the style guide was really appreciated by the designer. Whenever there was a discussion about a possible variant of a button and so on, there was always a visual reference and something we could come back and discuss and say, hey, look, you're asking me to create this variant of the button or the input form, but wait a moment, maybe we can reuse this one. Ah, yes, good idea, yes. And so this kind of discussion started to happen between developers and designers. I'm still talking about mobile web developer. And also there was also me being a pain in the ass, like in this case. So opening ticket for the designer in which, look, folks, I don't know if you see here, but essentially like, sorry, designers. Essentially, in order to have this visually centered, it was cheating on the space between the elements, no? So optically, great, but actually, how do you do it in CSS? So no, it's not possible, and so on. So, but at the end, I realized that this was really appreciated by the designers. So it happened that it started to get noticed. So it started to gain traction, if you want, and we were delivering visible and tangible improvements, more velocity, but you all know this, like what is a design system? It's this thing, modularization, reusability of code and components, better speed in the development, and better visual consistency. This was an element that everyone started to notice, like the quality of the mobile web application increased. Even the head of design started to notice this thing, and overall quality of the application, because of course less bug, the code is more consistent, the UI is more consistent. We start to have like a pattern in the way we build the UI. So what happened is that we had a pitch with the head of design, and the idea was to create a shared component library between mobile web and desktop web. Do you remember? I work in the mobile web team, and we had different code base, different UI, with different teams. So one team for mobile web, one team for desktop web, one team for iOS, one team for Android. And the idea was to merge, because this is, of course, it's the next thing that you think, okay? So we started with a grand plan, like, okay, whiteboards, let's start to rethink. We use design tokens there and variables, and then we use the style guide and VRT, and so on. We planned on this huge A3, everything, shared component library, mobile web code base, desktop web code base, and then we build the sketch using SketchUp, and so on. And then, can you see visual regression testing, huge plan, no? But here comes the dragon, do you remember in the history, no? And the dragon was the Rethink project. What was the Rethink project? The Rethink project was a project of complete redesign, rebranding, everything of the application. That's why it was called Rethink, because it was really a rethinking. Everything was put in discussion. From the top management was reconsider everything. Imagine that you have to Imagine that you have design today, Badoo, never existed. What would you do? And everything was challenged. Typography, iconography, tone of voice, color palette, everything. And even the application itself, there were A/B testing about, I don't know, let's say what happens if you remove the chat. Wait, it's a chat application. What happens? Or what happens if you remove the avatar of the user? Everything was challenged. The logo went from this to this. The application itself, as I told you, Badoo exists since 2009, so it's more than 10 years old, 15 years old now. More, even more. I can do math. And essentially, it already was evolved along the time, but here was a complete redesign. Like, let's start everything from scratch. No? In the meantime, the application has already, we went from here to here, okay? But in the meantime, the application has already evolved and evolved again, okay? So we are always in a constant flow of redesign of the application, if you think about it. And at the time, the designer started with a sketch file where they started to collect all the UI elements, like this is the font that we use for the headings, this is font that we use, the system font, these are our colors, these are our base, if you want, core or atomic elements of the application of the UI and so on. Perfect. In theory, this is the perfect use case for a style guide, right? Because essentially, one designer changed something in the sketch file, one developer immediately changed something in a style guide, right? Well, in practice, no. Why? There's no time. It's whoever was there knows this thing like, oh, we have 2 months, no, we'll never do it. Essentially, the idea was there is no time. What happened is that the Rethink project went, was developed in a single branch, completely detached from the main branch, which was master at the time, still. And the style guide was more and more in disarray, completely unmaintained. This is what happened. Essentially, elements were missing, not aligned, holes here and there, things completely misaligned. And the VR test, broken. Like, I cannot find this selector, I cannot find this selector, I cannot find this selector. Dead, flat line. Essentially, we never added anymore the test. It went from a living style guide to a dead style guide, which was a personal failure for me. And it was a personal failure, a professional crisis if you want, because I was not able to convey the value of explain why using a style guide would have made our life easier. Under this idea of there is no time, sometimes you don't have the arguments. And this is a problem of our profession sometimes. We have not the arguments to explain why something is better or is more efficient. And it was my failure, my fault. I still think that it is. So at this point, the question was, why keep it alive? I had this discussion and this conversation with my manager and other people of the team. And let's say, let's kill it, let's move it. There is no sense anymore. Well, luckily, not everything was lost. There were like 2 episodes, 2 things that essentially saved the day. First of all, I read this book called Systemantics, which is known mainly for these laws. Essentially, I read the Gall's law. A complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that worked. A complex system designed from scratch never works or cannot be patched up to make it work. You have to start over with a working simple system. Which, if you think about it, and this is alla colmatora that made me think about it, it's how evolution works. Life can only evolve from other life. You cannot evolve from a stone. And essentially, failure to function is something intrinsic in a system. That's one of the theses of the book. By the way, it was written 40 years ago. When it's not about design system, it's not about even computer or software. It's something unrelated. It's about social system, economic systems, and so on. So the idea that a system is naturally fails and naturally intrinsically is not perfect. Maybe rethink all my the way I was looking at what I've built in the meantime, which was I was looking at what was not working, what was missing, but look at the lining design system, they have all these things. Oh, look at I don't know, at the time, I don't know if there was the Shopify design system, but there were a lot of design systems you were looking at, and mine will never be like this. Well, I was looking at what was missing and not what already was there, what was already working. And the second crucial moment was when I received a mail. I was in Moscow, and I was out with some colleagues. I was there for work, and I received this email, which says, it was from Sasha Grishin, which was the head of design. I'm worried about the progress of the design system project. At the time, it didn't have a name. This is so important that for the whole mobile teams and the company. And for me, it was like, whoa. So immediately I replied, I was in front of this monument, which is the monument to the cosmonauts, cosmonauts in Moscow, and said, let's discuss when I come back, blah, blah, blah. My hope is that soon the Badoo design system will do like this, and it's a rocket lifting off. If you think about it, this is a designer, okay, telling to a front-end developer that he wants for this front-end developer to build a design system. He was not trying to build a fence to protect the, oh, wait a moment, this is called design. This is my area, stay off. In English, you say, don't piss on my lamp post, okay? He was understanding the value. I say, wait, he's understanding the value. And so there was a turning point meeting in which we met when I came back from Moscow. And what he asked me, I want a design system for all the mobile applications. A style guide built together with the designers based on the optimal new and upcoming design to serve as a visual reference for the developers. So the decision was to build a design system for all our mobile applications. At the moment, we decided to leave out desktop web because the UI are completely different, the code base are completely different. It's like try to put a square peg in a rounded hole. Okay? So last year was spent entirely building the system. And things really have taken off. First of all, I started finding a name. Why finding a name? I'll do a small digression. Today I was around in Prague, and I was talking about Prague and so on, their golem and so on. And somehow their golem changed my life, because there I realized of the connection between the words. If you think about it, their golem has a word, so the creation is done with the word. The Genesis is God using the words to create the universe. Vangelo in Italian. The Gospel, it's about the word. So the word has the possibility of create something. Why is so important giving a name to a design system? Well, it happened that after I started to give a name to the design system, everyone started to use this name. Before it was, oh, Badoo design system, and everyone was like, yeah, this thing, but I don't know exactly what it is. So I started to try to find a name, and I started to look at where everything started. And I remember this morning when I said, yeah, the cosmonauts, we are a Russian company, maybe I can reuse this name. And so I looked online for the etymology of the word cosmos, and well, normally cosmos, you think, okay, it's the universe. But actually the etymology is more rich, says order, good order, orderly arrangement. It's a complex, orderly, self-inclusive system, an orderly, harmonious, systematic universe. Well, cool. That's the name of my company, of my design system. So I started to call it Cosmos, and use extensively this emoji, which is a generic rocket. And the two things together attached in people's mind. From that moment on, people started to use Cosmos for everything, even things that were not actually Cosmos related. But I knew that they were using the word Cosmos in the wrong way. But for me, it was like, wow, it's working, it's working. Okay? And so that's how it looked like at the time. You see, it's the end of 2017, and then went on in 2018 and so on. No? The technical stack, nothing special. Nothing will blow off your socks. We use design tokens. Essentially, it's a way to declare some information about the UI in a structured way. If you want, I don't know how many of you have used SAS or less or something similar, or CSS variable. Imagine something like this. You declare a design value in a variable. In this case, it's structure, so you can elaborate it and transform it. And it's used also for generate the same kind of variables also for other platforms. So essentially for iOS, Android, and so on. And they're called design token. And we use Style Dictionary, which is a tool developed by one of the team in Amazon, by Danny Banks in particular. And essentially today we are using design token to deliver this design information, which is not necessarily only color, typography, maybe spacing, but we're also at component level, so we can say the height of the button or the padding of some kind of element, or I don't know, the shadow of another element. So you can express a lot of information about your design using design token. As you can see, we deliver a design token for iOS, for Android, for Cosmos, which is the design system itself, but also to the email templating system. We have another system for generating transactional emails, and we deliver also to them the design system. We use React, nothing special in this. A lot of companies are using React today, but the reason why we chose React was the right tool for us. But I imagine that you can use whatever other tool you want. When it comes to CSS, we are using SAS with BEM. We didn't find a strong reason why switching to another technology like CSS in JS. Nothing. Essentially, the components are so small that the cognitive load to just work on a file of 40 lines is so low that maybe we don't need to switch to another technology. Maybe in the future we'll do it for other reason, but the decision was, I don't see a reason why for now we need. So we stick to what we were used to. And we had a great collaboration with designers, developers, PMs, and so on. For now, the team structure is this one. So as you know, I started solitary, like in my spare time, if you want. And now it's federated, which means multiple people collaborate on the same design system. This doesn't mean on the same code base or on the same, how to say, we have different UI kit, one for iOS, one for Android, one for other products, one for mobile web, and so on. But essentially, we have people working under the same system. Where there are open discussion if moving to a more centralized way of working, essentially with a team, but we don't know yet. It's an open discussion. And the designer, if you see here, this is what I like of this. Essentially, it was in their sketch file, and it was a way for them to symbolize maybe we have too many sizes of this avatar element. And if you see the pink one is, okay, we want to reduce from this one to the other one. So essentially, they reduce the number of variants of a single element. And this happened for more or less all the UI. And they were the ones that told me sometimes, no, we can create an edge case for this one. Let's reuse this element. It was, wow, a surprise. Like, generally, this is not what happens. So we went from before, which was this, like this, and I imagine that many of you will relate to this one, to something more similar to this one. So essentially a conversation between product, designer, and the Cosmos team, which is me. And more specifically to something like this. So essentially, now the flow is that for every design ticket, we also create a DO ticket, which is essentially the design operation. And we create a ticket as a blocker. So essentially, the idea is that the developer never picks up a ticket unless the design and development ticket, design ops, and the design ticket, design visual design, are both done. And I do stuff like this, which looks crazy sometimes. Like, wait, this is not the work that you should do as design system. But it's a way for us to start to train people to think in terms of components. When a developer receives this one, start to see, okay, this is a P3, this is a CTA box. Okay, the CTA box is broken down in header, text, content maybe, buttons, and so on. So I don't expect maybe in 6 months, 1 year to continue to do this. I expect that in 6 months, 1 year, the developer that will receive the mock or the visual design will immediately think about, okay, this is a P3, this is a CTA box, and so on. But for now, the only way to train 50 developers for me was something like this. And this will come later about making sometimes choice which are like looks crazy or are anti-patterns. This is clearly an anti-pattern, no? But at the end of the year, essentially at the company company all ends, there was a celebration of Cosmos. Essentially, the top manager, I'm talking the top manager, the founder, the god. Essentially, they decided to give us time to expose all the work that we have done with Cosmos. And what you see here, essentially, this is the design. Pavel Shumakov, that's me. Artyom Rudoy, which is the Android developer. And in the photo is on this side, there's another iOS developer. So essentially, it was like a way for us to say to the company, look, we're here and we're here to stay. And we have the full endorsement of the top management. And this changed a lot of things. This was really a moment that changed things. Everything was downhill from that moment on because we have a full endorsement, full buy-in of the company. And essentially, the work that we are doing is also done in a slightly different way, but under the same, if you want, Cosmos design system, also by the native teams. This is an application which is essentially a showcase of the components. You can change product. You can see the components here, and so also. This is Android, same thing. You can see the components. So essentially, we are building multiple, if you want, UI libraries and galleries and so on, but under the same design system, if you want. And this will come later about the idea of one design system and multiple maybe libraries. Designers, same thing. They have their own sketch libraries. They have not necessarily always in sync components, like in terms of states. Do you remember we were talking about, okay, I have an input, I have the input with one line, I have an input with 2 lines, I have the input in error state, input disable, and so on. Not always is represented in this way in the sketch libraries, which potentially is also a problem, but more or less they're quite in sync. So let's go to today. Where are we now? Okay, it's showtime. Finally, you can see the system. Let me mirror. Yeah. Okay. So, okay, this is, let me zoom in, see better. Yes, this is the design system, nothing that will blow your socks off, as I told you. It's just the classic sidebar where you have all the components with different names, some resources like the file for the design token, the assets. As I told you, we've built a pipeline that takes one single sketch file and generate icons for mobile web in SVG JSX, in vector drawable for Android, and PDF for iOS. So essentially, we generate all the icons from one single place. Before, we had a lot of problems when one designer was supposed to give the same icon set or group of icons for maybe a new feature to one team, and then was forgetting to send to the other team. But in the meantime, I was updating one of the icons. So when the second team received the latest version, but not the previous team, and so on. So we decided to get rid of this process and unify everything in one single process through a pipeline built in Node. Copywriting, documentation status, and so on. And as you see here, what happens is that we can, let's take, for example, the classic button. Okay, you have a button, and you can have the button with different fonts and color, depending on the product, if you want. These are white labels, but if you see here, this is Bumble. This is the new entry in design system. Why it's a new entry? If you see, I have only 3 essentially components, because this is starting to be a it was already a multi-product in the sense that it was multiple product, but actually they were simply white labels. So imagine like a team. Okay, so something is blue. No, okay, now something is black. Something is with this font, something else. But essentially, they are exactly the same UI component. Now, with Bumble, we're starting to introduce components which potentially are also different. So it's a really multi-product design system and multi-platform. So essentially, we have components. Of course, they look the same. But for example, if you look at the design token, you see this is the name for Android, but this is the name for iOS, and this is the name for CSS. And for each one of these, you have different values. Because, I don't know, in some case, let me see, for example, let's see the token user card, let's see size. Okay, you have pixel, but then you have font sizes without any dimension. For Android is with dimension. And for every component, let's go back to the button, which is classic. You have the information about the button. Can you see we show different state of the information of the button? For example, when it's narrow, when it's in loading state, all the possible colors. So all the classic shebang of a design system. And then we have the information about the API of the component. For us, in this moment, this is the documentation. We don't have a proper documentation like, okay, what to do or not to do with this component, especially from the design point of view. We are thinking about adding it, but for now, we don't have this strong necessity, so we are focusing on something else. And if you look here, you have the type button, if it's narrow or not, multiple colors. So essentially here, you have the description of what the button can do from the perspective of the consumer of the button. And again, it's mobile web or web in general. It's not iOS, Android. They use something different. Actually, they don't even have documentation. Remember the application that I showed you? The small application are more galleries. So you see the component, but you don't have documentation. Then you have a small playground, nothing. You have seen many times this kind of element. You can change, I don't know, chat, and then you say, hello, people. Okay, you can disable and so on. And then there is a status. So essentially, this one is a meta information about the status of the component for different platforms, different products. So a developer can start to see, okay, wait, this is not ready yet for my platform. Maybe I have to build the component, or is in development, someone else is developing this component. Let me speak with someone and see and find out what is the status. Maybe I can reuse it. So there are a lot of information. And if you see here, we have a lot of components, even more complex, like if you take, I don't know, connection or chat, we have a lot of elements, like, I don't know, the GIF, the location item, text message, or text with link. So all the possible UI elements that compose the chat are under the chat, and so on. So we go from very simple components, like this is the simplest one, the verification status. Okay, very simple, one icon, different states, stop, to very complex elements, and we collect everything here. Let's see. Yep. Okay, so this is Cosmos. Today, I want to tell you a little bit about the things I'm noticing today. So you have seen this. We are in the, do you remember the curve? No, we are on this part of the curve. It's like all the dragons are killed, everyone is living happy forever. And now everything is somehow slower. Not slower in the sense that, like, last week was not slower, folks. It was a nightmare. But it's slower in the sense that the evolution of the design system now is well established. We cover 80% of the UI. We are not adding every day like a new component every day. It's more about starting to make so that the entire company start to rotate around the design system. Everyone start to use the design system. Everyone start to think in terms of components, of reusability. The work that we are doing now is whenever you design a component or whenever you design a UI, don't think about, oh, I'm designing the feature for photo verification for Badoo. No, think about multi-product now, and multi-platform, of course. But now we have unified all the design for all the platforms. So essentially, the decision was we have one single design. We have our own design language. We don't care about specific UI or controls for Android, iOS, and so on. Everything is unified, but not for product, because you want to have different products. And so now the challenge for the designer, and later from the architectural perspective for the developer, is how do I structure a component that can be reused for Bumble, Badoo, Chappy, Quack, Lumen, and so on. So how you design something that has its own visual identity and its own brand, but at the same time, it's in the same sketch file and possibly use the same components. At the same time, as a developer, how you do build the architecture that can support this kind of structure. So that's the human part that we're working on. And the thing that I'm noticing, everyone sees, I don't know if you know the story of the elephant and the blind monks. Essentially, there were a few blind monks, and they heard that there was this elephant in the village, and they want to understand what is the elephant. They never met one. And essentially, one was touching different parts of the elephant. Ah, okay, it's a tree. No, actually, no, it's a wall. No, it's a fan. Everyone was picking only one part of the entire thing. And this happens, the same thing for the design system. I don't know if it happens to you, but a PM sees something of a design system. A developer sees something else. The developer often think it's just the code base, just the UI library kit, or just the piece of code, and miss the entire part. The designer, it's my sketch file. And they miss the entire part, the ecosystem, they miss the human part, they miss the process, and so on. Another thing that I notice is that people freak out when there is not a component in Cosmos. Like, oh, it's not in Cosmos, what do I have to do? And it's like, what did you do 6 months ago? Like, he used to build UI anyway. So this is something that I have to keep in mind, because people really is like, now that, if you want, addicted to design system, when something is not in the design system, they panic, like, oh, it's not there. What am I supposed to do? And one thing that I started to do is to tell the people, whenever you have a problem, just ping me on chat and I'll come to you. And this is a strategy, it's made on purpose. I also have a small emoji, which is the motorcycle. And so essentially, whenever I say something, it's like, ping me and come to you, and the motorcycle. And it's on purpose. And everyone would think, like, you're crazy. Like, you have 60, 70 people chatting with you every time. Yes, at the beginning, it's complex, it's hard. But later, you start to have all the developers, they start to think like you. They understand why you're doing something. You can start to have conversation. 4 days ago, I had a conversation of 2 hours of why the icons in the, do you remember, we had one sketch file and generates all the icon sets. Some icons are black. Okay, some icons are still black, but attached to a style which is called dynamic. Because we need to say, okay, this icon is not black. It depends on the context, depends on the color that will be applied on the UI. And he wanted to have a default color. And to our discussion, to explain, there is no default color. Forget about the idea of default color. Because now you receive the asset, the icon, only as information from the system on one side, and the color will come from another part. You don't know what is the default color. You should not know. You should just connect two parts, and then design tokens will do their parts, and the asset will do their part. You are the connector, the one that plugs the element. You are not supposed to know what is the default color. Another thing that I notice, and this is the real life, is that there are not one dragon. There are multiple dragons. Every time it's bigger and more complex, and every time you risk to lose everything. There are days in which I say, oh, fine, I want to leave this company. I don't want to go work anymore in the design system. People doesn't understand what the design system is. And then, at the end, I go back and I say, wow, but you know what? This is the invisible part is what is keeping me every day. The human part, changing people's mind. Trust me, I was seeing a mountain and I was moving one stone little by little every day and say, it will never end. And now I see entire mountains moving. It's like, this is the exciting part of this part of the job, the building the human part around the design system. And I found this again and again and again every day. We are scared to have people meeting in a room because, oh, we are losing time and so on. Up to you, but don't think that meeting people is necessarily losing time. Sometimes conversations are important because you move the problem from one code base to actually people discussing and exchanging ideas and learning one from another. And so this idea of moving the problem from a code base into a meeting room, for me, it's very important. That's why I spent 2 hours discussing with one person about the color of it, default color of an icon, because it's really important. Another thing that I've noticed, having built so many components, is that there is a problem that we have with atomic design. Everyone knows of the atomic design, atoms, molecules, organisms, and so on. But actually, everything is a component. It's not only me saying that. Everyone, people smarter and with more experience than us already suggested this one. Gina, Nathan Curtis, Trent Walton, everyone say, don't start to categorize your components in this way. It's a fake categorization. Everything is flat. Of course, I don't know if you noticed in the navigation on the sidebar, there were small icons, but the icons are just a visual information about the complexity, but actually we use a completely flat folder structure. For the components, for the design token, for the structure, for the style guide, everything is flat, everything is a component. I don't have spatial variant of the component, oh, this is an organism and so on, because then you end up in a bad place, which is discussing about something which is not true. It's a molecule, it's an atom, it's a component. And we tend to have, but a pattern, yes, I found a pattern, which is this one. We tend to have two kinds of components. Something which is related to the layout of the component, to the, if you want, the organization of the content, and something which is the actual content. And you see that you have content and styling. And what happens is that you have components like this one, which are essentially only structure. I can show you maybe later. And other which are, for example, this one doesn't have a size. The size is the size of the parent. We'll always adapt to the parent. And composing these two, you can create the real component. So this is called feature card or connection item. It's using multiple places in our application, okay? And this is just a composition of two patterns. And this pattern over there, it's using multiple places. So we tend to use multiple patterns which are layout patterns. And we don't use something like stack or grid. For now, we didn't have this need, but we have a few structure, like visual elements structure in our system. Why? Because the point is, when you receive design, you receive this one. You don't receive, okay, as a designer, look, this is the geometry of the component and this is the content. No, what you receive is this one. You have to mentally be able to do the other way around, to break down, which takes me to the atomic. If you think about the atomic process, what, as a developer of the components, or design, if you want, the one that implement the component, the work that you do is on the other way around. We don't go from atoms to molecules. You receive a design, and then you need to be able to break it down. And you need to be able to decide where to stop breaking down. Because maybe you break too much, and you arrive to something you just powder. You don't have any more structure. And so this process, whoops, it's important to understand when stop having a one component. If you try to extend, and doing so much. I have a background as CSS developer, which means for me, I used to say, okay, component A. But yes, I need the component or the UI with a different color. Yeah, you add a class. No, if you think about it, you have class. Every class is doing something, specializing something in this component. Or you go up, you go to the parent, and you say, the button is blue, but in the context of the sidebar, so you say sidebar button, sidebar.button. In the context of the sidebar, the button is red. Okay, you always go or the parent, so up, or you go sideways, like, okay, let me extend something. Don't do it in components. In the component world, break down. Create, try to find, if you have two components which are similar, try to find the common part and extract in some kind of pattern and then reuse it. In this way, you start to create patterns. But this is not natural when you think about atomic design only in terms of Brett Frost categorization. Again, because you tend to think in this way, go in the other way around, in the other direction. Because the complexity lies in the connections. You have to build the API. Do you remember the API with the definition of the connection? Is how you connect one component with another together in another component. This is the problem that you have. This is how the connection, the red parts are the complex one. Not building one component, but building so that it's pluggable with other elements to build bigger components. This is the atomic design. Another thing is the classic problem that everyone has, matrix. Everyone asks you about matrix. So I started with this one long ago when there was a request from the manager, so on. We need to have some kind of metric, a design system, the evolution, and so on. At the beginning, for me, was like really a pain. Like, come on, we don't have metrics. It's impossible to have metrics for design system and so on. So I came up with this idea. Okay, let's count the lines of code. So we started to count the components, and you see, for example, can you see a difference? Yes. In July 2017, we had 9 components overall between components and subcomponents. Now we have 167. Not components, component plus subcomponents. Line of code, 200, 8,000. Wow, cool. But it's a metric? Yes, it's a metric in reality. Visualization test. Okay, let's count the number of shots that we take. Because the more shots you take, the more elements in the UI you have. And again, you start to see some kind of pattern, no? And then more recently, it was my biannual review, and I was thinking, what metric can I have? What metric can I find? I want to add something. I was already using this number and so on. And I said I'm on, because the day before I was discussing with my colleague about, we were looking about a change in not in a component, but in some code, and he was playing with git log and so on. And I put the two things together. I say, wait a moment. When I run git log stat, I can see the number of changes in the code. I can see number of file touched, number of line added, line removed. I say, wait a moment, what happens if I run a command like this one, like I search online, what is the way in which you can extract information from git log? And I found out that essentially you can say, okay, find me all the less files in the entire history of the repo, and we're talking about, I don't remember how many years, but a lot of years of I think it's more than 4 years at least, because essentially there was another redesign and so on, so it's like a fresh repo of 4 years ago. And also SAS, then we migrated to SAS. Find me all the change in the code. And essentially you start to see for every commit, number of lines added, line removed, files touched, and so on. And I processed this in some kind of data visualization. And what I found out is this one. We'll see it live in a moment in a real web page. So essentially here you can see this is 2017, 16, 17, 18, essentially here December. It was the last of the year, the biannual review. What you see here is essentially the fact that if you see here, there were a lot of changes. Also big changes. Do you remember the Rethink project? So this is the Rethink project and so on. But what happened here, this is the introduction of the design system. And you clearly see a difference in the sense that this one and this one, they're not the same. Look how much blue is there. And you will see it live in a second, the big difference, which is this one. Okay, so same visualization. This is a real application. Look what happens, because at the beginning it was cool. I say, wow, I found something. This is the real impact. You can really see the impact of the design system. But then I tried to change visualization, and it was even more impressive. Same visualization, each bar is a change. The higher, because who is going to find what is wrong in this data visualization? There is a conceptual error here. The radius, okay, so it's not linear, the relation between this bubble and this bubble, because it's an area of a radius. So I'm emphasizing, so I was saying, oh, maybe I'm cheating, yeah. This is linear. The height is just the dimension. Then a fixed width, so at least you can see it, because we are talking about days. Okay, so look what happens when you shrink this one. Can you see? There remains very dense and blue. Here, no, it's still transparent. What it means, the frequency of change has diminished. This is the real impact, the measure of the impact of a design system. Because essentially you make a change, it's short UI, because that's what I was seeing day by day in my daily work, that essentially we are working less. We used to be three UI developer, and now there was one UI developer that moved to another team. I work mainly on the design system and another UI developer. So wait a moment, we used to be 3, now it's 1. We are more or less the same amount of work and ticket per month. So this is the real impact of the design system. And again, it's a real metric. I don't know, for me it's pretty synthetic. Like, are you sure that this change is not because you receive less ticket to do? Maybe. Or the UI is more stable? Maybe. But still you can see an impact. And what about the users? What about the metrics for the users? It's not easy, eh? Because in theory, the user should not notice that we're using a design system. At least not like, apart from, oh, looks better, this application is more consistent. I don't know. It's not easy, the matrix. It's a tough argument. Okay, now I want to talk to you about the future. Like, everything is easy, the design is there, but actually, no, it's not easy at all. I have a lot of open questions which I don't have an answer for. Maybe you have an answer you can share with me. Like, how do you design a multi-product and multi-platform feature? As I told you, like, okay, let's start. Let's open Sketch, blank screen. How do you design something that can be used across different products? Because what makes on-brand something? What makes Badoo Badoo and Bumble Bumble and your application? Because we're talking about the same UI elements. Who has an input form? I have a, you? Don't you have an input in your design system? Yes. Do you have a button? Okay. Do you have a checkbox? Yes. Do you have a media? Yes. Same elements. So what makes something a brand? What makes something? And how do you find the right balance between, okay, I need something which has its own identity, its own brand, coherent, versus something which is reusable? Because from the developer's perspective, what they expect is that, well, it's, I don't know, button here, it's button here, should be the same button, same code base. Don't make me write two times the same code base. And they want to reuse, but then you lose the identity. You see all the products which are the same, which is not what you want. How do you find the right balance? And even if you find the right balance, even if you define something which is on brand, okay, are you sure you're delivering value for the user? I mean, this difference between the brands is real value. These are real, eh? We're still working on this one. The date of birth picker, when you sign up, is really something that makes your brand distinctive? I don't know. For me, no. But it's not an easy question to answer. Like, go to the person that needs to design this one and convince them, can you make them all the same? Because it's a date picker. And sometimes it's not easy to define what makes something on brand. And again, do you remember I discussed before, like, okay, one design system, cool, one design system, but how many UI libraries? Because if you need different buttons, maybe you need two pieces of code, one button A for Badoo and button B for Bumble. Because you remember, you have the brand. You need to have differences sometimes between these two elements. How many libraries you create? Because you still have one design system. This was one of the slides that Yesena Perez-Cruz presented last year at Clarity. And at Vox Media, they're using one design system, serving 350 websites and 8 brands. And for me, this one design system means one process, one group of people, the way we work together as a company, but not necessarily one library. So I still don't have an answer about how many libraries do we have. Another question is how much of the user interface? it will happen to you also. Like, can we have this in the design system? Why this is not in the design system? Or yourself, like, wow, there is this new cool feature. Should I add the elements in the design system? Because how much do you cover? Everything? Because when you arrive maybe at 80%, what is marginal, you have to think also the marginal gain, because maybe adding one component, which is only one page, takes you maybe 1 week because it's very complex. Are you sure there is value in spending 1 week into adding the component, which is already defined and never change it? Maybe not. So I like to think of what can be reasonably left out. So generally I tend to say, let's not add to the system if there is no value, if leaving out doesn't change much. So I always tend to be very lean. We had a long discussion the other day about what to include or not in a design system. So I know it's been a long journey, but I want to share with you some conclusions and lessons learned on this journey the hard way. First of all, it takes time to have buy-in. Don't be discouraged. It took me 2 years, so be patient and don't give up. And you can push change. I tried, it didn't work. You have to pull, you have to deliver value, and then they will come to you. They will start to see why you're doing something. They see the value and say, wow, this thing is cool. What is called? Design system. Ah, nice. And be prepared to fail. You will fail. I failed so many times because every system fails. It's in the nature of a system to fail. You have to fail and then grow. Fail and grow again. And learn from others. We're an amazing community. We have tons of resources, conferences, article on Medium. We can look at other people's design system, look at their code base and so on. But then make your own choice. I made so many choices which are like absolutely mental from the perspective of like, no, you should never do this. Like all the documentation that you saw about the status of a component for the other platform, it's in a Google Doc. Like, no, you don't have a CSM system or you don't have a more solid. No, at the end, the option was we implement something and then they say, okay, let's start with the Google Doc. And then we find out, we learn what happens, how people use it and so on. And then we decide, we take a decision about later what to do or the end-offs with all the components breakdown and so on. So make your choice. Don't just copy other people's choices. And about measure, for me, it was a hard lesson because I was always against measure. Because everything is a synthetic measure. Everything is not a real measure. It's not a scientific measure. It's always an approximation of something. But what you're looking for is not the truth. It's a trend. It's something that gives you like a direction. Something that also makes your manager, your colleagues, and everyone else like, okay, something is changing. Something is evolving. It's a way to convey information about having some kind of impact. Okay. I leave you with this phrase, which is on the I found on the London Museum of Design, which is by Henry Ford. Nothing is particularly hard if you divide it in small jobs. Thank you.